Welcome everybody to the Chicago Sencha user group. If you're not here for Ext JS 5 tonight, you're sadly in the wrong place. But there is free pizza and beer, so it could be worse. Tonight, before we get started, I just want to go through our list of sponsors, just so everybody knows who is putting this thing together, so we can all collectively say thank you. First, Sencha provides costs for meetup.com and some of the swag we're going to give away today. They also pay for some of our beer, so thank you to Sencha. Sencha and Ext is the office in which you find yourselves at this moment, so thank you Sencha and Ext. They also buy pizza. Many of the Sencha and Ext guys are here tonight, so thank you Sencha and Ext. Last but not least, we have JetBrains, who's going to give us a free license to one of their products away tonight. It's a value up to, I think, like $600 or $700, so it's not a bad deal. So thank you, JetBrains. And finally, if you want to speak, if you have an idea about something you want to hear about, if you want to give something away or financially sponsor us in some other way, please get a hold of me or somebody from Sencha and Ext, and we'll get you involved in some way. It makes my life easier. And so that's Sencha. My name is Art, by the way. I work for Sencha. I'm here in Chicago. For those of you who don't know me, but a lot of familiar faces tonight. So that's my deal. And tonight we have Jay Garcia from Modus Create, as well as Mitchell Simoens, who's also a colleague of mine at Sencha. He presents Ext JS 5 tonight. So let me fire this thing off to Jay. Hey, Jay.
Hi, so can you hear?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Hello, everybody. Jay Garcia, coming out of the DC area. Been a long supporter of the Sencha community since about 2006, back when there were just a few people working on the framework, including Jack Slocum, who here has actually had time to mess with the Ext JS 5 preview. Awesome. Okay. Who has experience with Ext 4? Oh man, it's easy then. Cool. So the presentation I'm going to be walking through with you guys today is literally just a 10,000-foot perspective. There are going to be a lot of questions you guys are going to have, I imagine, about some of the technical details. This was really developed for folks who are looking to migrate from the Ext JS 2 or 3 world over to Ext 5. So some of the stuff may seem a little redundant. Who here has used Sencha Touch before? 2.0 and above? Okay. So yeah, a lot of this may seem a little redundant to you. But I'm hoping to show you guys some cool things, perhaps things you have not read of or exercised for those of you who look into the framework. Let's go ahead and get started. So one of the biggest changes I think that the Sencha community was welcome was the limiting of the browser support. So who here actually supports the IE 6 or 7? I feel really bad for you guys, okay? It's not your fault. Yeah, as you are aware. And I imagine you guys do a lot of expletives when it comes to those two browsers. The reality is that in order to move Ext JS forward, the Sencha team had to really reduce the compatibility with Ext. So with IE 6, IE 7, those pretty much get the boot. We'll be talking about some class system updates. We'll be looking at the new charting package. I'll be walking through some examples of how MVC is getting better. And I'll be describing to you how you can use the loader system to load in packages on demand. So as I said earlier, IE 6 and 7 are gone. For those of you who have to support IE 6 and 7, I don't know, I doubt there's going to be a compatibility layer. So, okay, yeah, so it's completely gone, that's what I thought. And then these are the other browsers that are supported. So for those of us who are looking forward, we were lucky enough to have customers that look forward IE 8 plus. I mean, IE 8 still sucks, but arguably sucks less than IE 6 and IE 7. So that allows the Sencha team to manage a lot less code, a lot less CSS, and so on. So it's kind of a good win for us. They are looking to support IE 8 through at least 2015. So we'll see how all that plays out. It depends on how far along the enterprises drag IE 8 along. Chances are it's going to be a long time if we're still seeing IE 6 and IE 7 along as well. So there are some themes that have been added. So you guys should all pretty much be familiar with this classic theme. This has existed with the framework since 2.0, nothing new here. They are going to allow you to have a great theme out of the box. This is actually what I use because I'm realizing more and more I'm an old guy, so I don't know if this contrast I kind of enjoy. The accessibility theme does get a little bit of a boost. They're focusing a lot on accessibility. And this new theme called Crisp. So Crisp basically brings your applications down to like a Windows 1.1 style view. Not to disparage it, I actually like it. It just feels very plain, and I think that is the way the UX people are going today, is very plain, blocky, and so on. Less gracious. So with ext4, you saw the Neptune theme come in, and it took a long while from the time the theme was announced to when it was actually readily available. I believe Neptune should be available when ext5 is available today with the beta version. With that, they're going to be focusing on a touch theme that allows you to use this with tablets. So compatibility with tablets is a big plus, and that makes Steve Jobs very happy. So with the class system, use the config system with the ext4. Because it's a big pain in the ass. You have to figure out whether you need to execute any config and so on and so forth. With the ext5, it's used for custom classes, but it's not used in. So if you are a touch user or a touch developer, and you're used to using the config system to its fullest capabilities, then migrating to ext5, who has successfully migrated the ext5 application? Okay, cool. Yes, so you guys, yeah, Richard, in fact, I saw that. And the reason it was relatively easy, and I'm sure there are a few bugs that you guys ran into in this beta, is because they really focus on compatibility. ext3 to ext4 broke a lot of compatibility. Like, it was, night and day. Mainly that had to do with the class system in conjunction with a bunch of other things, like manipulating of the DOM, changes in the layouts and all that stuff. The migration is good for all of us who want to take advantage of the framework's new capabilities. So the class system benefits, for those of you who are not aware, you have the capability of having multiple inheritance, which are known as mixins. You have statics, which basically allow you to have methods that are basically tied to the constructor of the class and properties as well. You have easy superclass method chaining, which you execute this.call parent. It's easy. Instead of myApp.view.myPanel.superclass.initComponent.apply, open parens this, comma, whatever arguments, it just gets in the ass. Today it's just this.call parent. The X-type registration has been improved. These are all things that came back from migrated forward from the ext4. The big difference is that they have the introduction of privates. And I'll walk you through really quickly what that stuff does. This basically shows you a config system example. So basically, I'm defining my panel here in this view.panel.myPanel namespace. And here I have a configuration block. This is known as a prototypal config. So there are two types of configs in the framework. You have the instance config and the prototypal config. The prototypal config invokes things like automatic getter, etc., method definitions, and a few other things, which I could easily spend a few hours on. I'm going to just get away from that. But the example here basically shows you that when you go to create a component instance, here I'm creating an instance, I'm passing in an anonymous config. This is known as my instance config. Here I'm overriding for the instance first name from J to Takeshi, and I can execute my panel instances get first name method. And what you'll see is that Takeshi will be returned back in the console. And that's because the config system automatically generated this getter for me. So you have the opportunity when you define your class to override the getter if you want to do that. Likewise here, I'm executing set first name. When I define my class, I didn't have to define that. That's because the config system does that for me. So there's a lot of cool stuff. when it comes to thinking about using a config system, like knowing that your applications or your custom components have APIs that you can leverage. There's the applier path, which I won't get into, but the idea is that the config system, I think, is a big improvement. With ext4, I would have to execute the init config function here, deal with some messy things. Thankfully, you don't have to deal with that. ext5 does it for you. So privates, this is pretty cool. So here I'm defining a panel, and what I'm doing here is I'm setting an object known as privates, right? All he does is does console.log, nothing special. The important thing is that this function is defined inside of this box, so that's this block here. And if I go to extend that panel and just blindly try to override that function, I'm going to get an exception from the browser. Okay, so the browser will throw an exception saying that the public method say hi was declared by panel 2, but it conflicts with the superclass basically. So this gives you an opportunity to have functions that should not be overridden. And I say should not because it is JavaScript and it can't really prevent certain things from happening, right? So if you wanted to override the say hi function, you would just basically have to extend panel 1 and just put say hi in another privates block, and the framework will gladly override it. But the idea is that you are making sure that you're really telling the class system, hey, look, I know this is private, and I definitely want to override or extend the function.
So if you do a query component to get that component, can you access that function?
Yeah.
So it's compared to like,
yeah.
So it's like a protected versus a...
Yeah, you can think of it as protected. They didn't use the word protected because they just, I forget why.
Well, they don't need to model that for Java or
right.
that or something. So, but it's more like it can't be overwritten when you're extending from that.
It's suggested that it should not be overwritten, but it can be. Absolutely can be.
Private,
right, right. So I would just wrap say hi here in a private object, and it would gladly do it without even warnings.
So in your source code, are you moving a lot of those private methods to be actually private now? Like if we actually provide before?
No.
Not using it.
I don't think that is the case today. So who here used the ext4 charting package? Okay, who loved it?
What do you mean by that?
It's a loaded question now. So with ext4, coming from ext3 introduced charting into the framework for the first time. But what they did was they basically took the YUI chart, Flash-based, and wrote a wrap around it, delivered it, and that caused a big problem for support. Every time there was a bug found, Sencha unfortunately did not update the charting package in their framework to support the latest and greatest YUI charts. Well, with ext4 they said screw Flash, which a lot of people did at the time, and they decided to have their own charting package from scratch. There were a lot of issues with the charting package. It didn't really follow best practices. There were performance issues and so on. So with ext5, what they did was they said, this charting package kind of works, but it's not as awesome as it could be. They actually took something that's better, which is the touch charts, and they said, well, we just take the touch charts since they're already touch compliant, they work, they're highly performing, and we're just moving to ext JS. And it turned out it actually worked out very well. So the new charting package for ext5 is leaps and beyond better than it was for ext4. For ext4, I would tell folks, hey, look, you can use charts for basic stuff, but for performance reasons and maybe some maintenance issues, you might want to steer away from it and go with like high charts or something. Today, I fully support the use of the Sencha Ext JS charting package because the Touch 2 charts are actually really freaking awesome. So they added some things like the Candlestick and OHLC series. You have the ability to. I'm getting a call. All right. You have the ability to have some interactions with your mouse or your finger, pan zoom, and you can have little crosshairs to sort of view these over. You have multiple axes. You have the ability to have today SVG and Canvas support, and there's a huge performance boost for using this over the ext4 package. And, I'm actually really excited about this stuff. So let me walk you through really quickly. They have a kitchen sink for this. Yeah, that should not be it. Chart secret's true. There we go. Sorry, there's the kitchen sink, and then there's the kitchen sink. I think they're going to be merged eventually. So the reason I say that is because there's a charting kitchen sink, which I don't know if is maintained right now, but then there's the actual kitchen sink, and if you put here charts equals true, then it shows you like the hidden kitchen sink. It's kind of like Five Guys with hidden menu. It's like you say, okay, I totally want to use this. But what's cool about this is right away you get to see the code. I mean, as any kitchen sink examples I've had in the past, I'm trying to figure out, yeah, there we go. You can start seeing some of the animations. One of my favorites, and it kind of reminds me of a lifesaver. Where are we? We're going to go to pie charts. There we go. So the 3D pie, I totally want a lifesaver every time I see this. But really freaking smooth. They're doing a, oh, we totally reset, that's awesome. So it's leaps and beyond, bounds above what the prior charting system was. So if you had a bad experience or less than awesome experience with the ext4 charts and you're looking at something better when you migrate to ext5, I would highly suggest looking at this. These are pretty good. So we'll walk really quickly through some of the MVC changes. So who here developed an application with ext4 and did not use MVC? What?
We actually got a .NET shop, so we actually use the ext.NET.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, not compatible. That's fair. I actually had a customer that is a .NET shop. They use ext3 today. They were looking at migrating to ext4. Go ahead, dude.
I guess the share this.
Yeah, go for it. And
If you need a chair, we can grab a chair from out there for you.
they decided not to go with the MVC package altogether, just because they have like over 250,000 lines of code. And they're just like, no freaking way.
Yeah,
We just want to literally take whatever code we have in the ext3 and put it in the ext4 and see if it works. And I was like, that's going to take a while. So just be aware. Anyway,
for that.
yeah. So that is to say that the MVC stuff that you've written in the ext4 should be completely backwards compatible with the ext5. I mean, really, really well done, I think, in my opinion. They did make some changes, though, to kind of give you a way out of the monolithic MVC approach. That is, if you have monster controllers and you're trying to find views in your app and so on and so forth. So they introduced the MVVM pattern, the model view model pattern. I really hate talking about this because it just gets very confusing, but I'm going to try to simplify it as much as possible. So in my mind, when I think of a piece of functionality, I think of modules. I'm not a Java developer, but this actually makes a lot of sense. So if you think as a module as a collection of a view model instance, and a model, okay? So the view itself binds to the view model, okay? So he will listen to events, or the binding is automatic. So you can basically say, on my grid, I want to bind a store, and if I click something in the grid like a column to change sorting, well, that binding dictates that the store will change its sorting pattern, and the store's sort results will get reflected in the grid. Works very well. And it actually gets way more complicated than that, but I wanted to come up with a very simple example. The model naturally supplies the data structures for the view model and so on. This is where things get to be interesting. You get to add a ViewController into this module pattern. So the ViewController itself will listen to events from the view, can execute functions on the view or the view model itself, and the binding between the ViewController and the view is really simple. This is why I fell in love with this. I'm not gonna lie, I was really hesitant to adopt this. I thought to myself, holy crap, this is going to be a lot of code. Like, why would I ever use this? And then I started to deal with it and said, okay, I totally get the value. It took me a few days, but I totally got the value. So in this example, I have a grid panel that I want to define. So I just want to get the mouse out of the way. So I have my model, which I'm calling him class model, and some of these names are a little bit nebulous, and I apologize. But I have my grid view, my grid controller, which is a view controller, and my grid model. Now, in the MVVM pattern, the way they defined it, your view controller and your view model exist in the same directory as your view. Easier just to keep them there. Logically, they can be moved wherever you want in the application, but they suggest keeping them there so you can easily figure out where they are in the file system and modify them accordingly. So if you think about this pattern, you're just like, shit, I got 4 files I got to modify just for one view. That seems like a lot. And it can be seen that way. But the idea is that I can now know that for every instance of this grid, I easily have a bound grid controller or grid model view model. So there, I don't have to worry about in a simple central, what are now known as root level controllers, trying to find a reference to the grid. I know that when an event is fired off the grid controller instance had already been instantiated. He catches it, does what he needs to do, and if he has to throw an app level event out to the bus, he can do that. So let's walk through some code. This is the output, by the way. Really, really simple. So this is the model. This should be extremely simple to you guys who are familiar, right? So we define our class model, or excuse me, he's just a data model definition, extending data.model. He has two different fields, and here what I'm doing is I'm literally creating a data item on the fly. You notice that there's no data index. Mapping. I always get those two confused. Thank you. I know, it sounded wrong when it came out. I was like, I can't stop it coming out. So the model, really simple, right? We're going to go from the top to the bottom, from the bottom all the way to the top. This is where it gets to be fun. So I'm creating my view model now. Now I could put the word view in here. I decided not to because then I'd have view and then view, and it just gets to be a little weird, redundant. But the important thing to note is that I'm extending app.viewModel. I am setting up my alias as viewModel.classList. And I'm requiring the model I defined before. Now here I'm defining a stores object. And I have a key that's called classes. And this basically is, this block that I'm highlighting in this awesome circle that's not being drawn, is literally a data store configuration object that I'm going to be binding to a grid map. That's it. So I have this separation now where I can have multiple stores defined for a specific view, and I can have data structures and so on and so forth. But here I just have a very, very simple example. In this stores config, I'm going to define the use of the class model that I showed you in the previous slide. And now we're going to walk our way to the view itself. So here's my grid. I have the, this is where the binding to the class list view model occurs. And what you'll see in a minute, this is ridiculously redundant, and I probably will change this in future slides. I actually have a view controller that I'll show you in a minute, but I'm binding to the view controller here. So very much like you're used to dealing with X types in views and other types in the framework, like plugin types and so on, they get confusing all the time. Your controllers and view models have types or aliases that you can define. So in the previous slide, I showed you where I had the alias viewModel.classList, and in this slide, this is where the binding for that view model is. And you'll see where I have an alias for a view controller. It'll be alias : view controller or controller.classList. Now here in this bind object, I'm saying I would like you to bind to the store to the store instance or store property of this view an object known as classes. And that was defined in the previous slide. Remember this guy? And that's where I'm setting up that binding. So I can just say, hey, look, use this property, and it's going to be instantiated automatically. And the rest is pretty much self-explanatory. I have my columns defined here. I have the data index of number of dependencies, and then here name. The one thing that's important to highlight is here I have a listeners object, and I have an item click listener, and I have an on-item select string. This is new. Used to, in the past, you'd have to be within the scope of the view, so maybe in a component or some other function, and you'd have to register the scope and the actual function reference as a listener. In ext5, what I'm demonstrating or dictating to the framework is that for the controller, I would like to execute on item select when this view's on item click event is fired. So I don't have to worry about being within scope. And all of this from here to here, this is nothing but JavaScript. So you kind of get away from having to deal with function declarations and having to deal with scope handling and shit like that. It just takes care of it for you.
Can this scope be other things?
It can be, I believe it's this, which means the instance of that view.
Oh.
So it's a string value of this. It's not going to be, the real this keyword, because that'll be window. And the framework will not be happy. You don't want to make the framework grumpy. So this is a view controller. It's really simple. Again, I wanted to walk you guys through a very, very simple example. So I'm defining my grid controller, extends app.viewController. Here's my alias, controller.classList, and this is my onItemSelect function. And that's, you remember, we bound it previously with the listeners object on the view. And I'm doing a console.log, and I'm firing an event here. And this is where things get to be interesting, because you can have controllers fire events. Those of you who are familiar with the MVC pattern in Ext or Touch. And this is how I like to use things. I like to say in my view controller, if it needs to lob something up to the application event bus, it does so. It doesn't have to worry about trying to get a reference to another controller or another view somewhere. Just to say, look, something happened, whoever's listening for it, this event occurred. So it basically allows me at this point to say, if it's the right time of day or the right day of the week, then we fire this event. If not, we just basically squash the event execution. And with this, you're able to bind an entire application structure. So if you think of, what I don't show you here is root level controllers, because the reality is that in the new MVC plus VM model, sorry, just wanted to make sure it's not paying attention. You generally don't have to put a lot of code in the root level controllers anymore. A lot of them can go in the view controllers, and that's actually pretty damn cool. And you can have root controllers talk to or listen to multiple modules or multiple view controllers. And it just works. So you can go back to the ext4 way of developing apps for ext5, and it'll just work. Or you can adopt this newer way, and it's a little bit of a departure from what you're used to, but it works, and it works pretty damn well. Sorry, any questions about the MVC VM? It's a lot of, like, holy shit, shotgun blast in the face stuff. But I try to find something that's very simple that a lot of people are kind of used to seeing. Yes?
The view controller say what events it wants to listen to a view, you have to tell the view controller what's it can.
Yes, you can. You absolutely can. So I will see if I can pull up an example real quick. That's definitely a really bad example. So this is a good example. So I would like to listen to this X type, this event, for this method. Or you can listen to controllers. So basically, it's not a listener. This is where I screw up all the time. You listen here. Other questions? You guys are really easy or insulin shocked.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, sorry, dude.
So would the MVVM be considered the new best practices? Like that?
Yes.
When you talk about best practices, like my customers are always asking about that. What's the best practice?
Well,
Does we tell you that?
I think it's a suggested practice. What's best, I think, is what really will come out of it over time.
Okay.
And this is purely speaking from a community perspective.
Okay.
So it is a practice that they definitely suggest. And it may be that the amount of files that is required to be created for large apps can just be overwhelming, and that there may be some limit. It's entirely possible.
But it sounds like you personally are convinced that this is a better
Yeah.
structure.
I think so. I think it is, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it took me a while because, like, just dealing with so many files, I mean, it just gets to be overwhelming. But after a while, yes, I felt like it was good. It was a good way to go.
Did you ever try Deft.js or Glue.js?
I read to Deft, have not used it. What are your questions, Rowan?
I was just kind of curious if you use it.
Okay, gotcha.
The guys at Deft are working on a compatibility layer that ties into this. They're going to have a blog post on the Sencha blog in the coming weeks.
Yeah, the dev team has been working with them to make sure that everything sounds good. I think they were supposed to, the dev team was supposed to be introducing promises at one point, right? Is it in the framework state? They dev or days. No, but I thought it was like supposed to be an EXT thing too. I didn't know if they were promising when they're not promising.
No, it's not.
Promised land? Awesome. All right. So, yes.
So how do you decide, like, what, like,
use like a unit of work. You don't, for a view controller, you don't actually have like one view controller for every single.
You don't have to, no. No, you can have a view controller to listen to a composite view. So a composite view naturally has multiple views that are set up as children to some parent. And you can listen to events from the parent, or you can actually use selectors to go down if you want to do that. I've not done that before because the apps I've been using have been built from scratch. Like we haven't migrated any ext4 apps to date. We've been looking at them. And I was supposed to work on one recently, and timing just hasn't worked out. But yeah, it's just one of those things that's, I think it is possible, right? Can't you select this?
Yeah, it gets a little tricky, but let's say you have a form with form fields, and just like you have listeners on that grid, if you have listeners on one of the form fields, that method can get tied to the view controller on that form automatically like that.
Right.
It gets tricky because you have to say that form field is within another container, and that container had a view controller, but that form has a view controller. So you kind of get trapped.
Which one? Oh yeah.
So you get a little bit tricky there. But yeah, it's as simple as just listeners config, just like you just use it on the root level.
And I have run into a similar issue where I had listeners for the same event in 2 different controllers. And I was getting double console logs. So I was like, what? Oh yeah, okay. That's not good practice. So just one of those things.
Just thinking about stuff like tab panels and stuff where you potentially could be able to communicate between them. It seems odd, like where you want to draw that line between each tab be its own controller, or like something higher than that.
Yeah, I think that totally depends on the application itself, right? So if in your tab you have like a border layout that needs to have components that can talk to each other, they do their little thing until it needs to be escalated up, then I could easily envision setting up a view controller for that one tab that was really complex. And then if it needed to, it would just basically escalate, or excuse me, fire up a component level event or something like that on the tab itself, for which a higher level view controller could listen to. This pattern could really get very nested very quickly.
Yeah.
That's one of those things I'm really grappling with right now. But it seems it's like off the cuff, with spending a few weeks on it, a good pattern to move forward with. Because in the past, just having these long controllers, where's the view? I don't know, let's look for it. Like, it's just so much faster because every time you create that view, it's view controller literally has a reference to the view or any child views within that composite view. However you set it up. You can set up references that can go as far deep as you want. It's pretty awesome.
I like to call it like working locally versus globally.
Right. And that's why I like to use the term module, because you're thinking in this one unit cohesively. So one of the things, I don't know if you guys have noticed, I did certainly when I set up my first ext5 project, was how things had changed in the file system. And the biggest change was this guy right here, packages. It was added in later versions of ext4, but I noticed this little guy, and I said, holy crap, what's going on here? And it turns out that Sencha, in order to make sure that ext5 and Sencha Touch, the newer versions of Sencha Touch that should be released in due time, share the same amount of core code, which was a goal many years ago. It's now coming to fruition. So what they did was they said, all right, well, we're going to make the core portion of the framework its own package. And so that gets included automatically with Sencha command. And that also means that things like charts, or the compatibility layer, or the locale, or the IE quirks, and themes, all of those are broken out into packages. The net effect of this is a much larger, dare I say, a package or directory in, like, starter application in your file system. So it went from like 60-something megs to like 78 megs or something like that. So it's grown quite a bit. But the reason they did that is because when you actually look to build your application, they're working very hard to make sure that they understand the dependencies of your classes. And I'm going to show you a tool that I'm working with, co-developing with the Sencha engineering team to help you understand, like, really what is the dependency model of my application. So right off the bat, when you look to develop your applications, in the past, packages like ext charts were automatically demanded in. Today, that's not the case. So in order to do that, you modify app.json, yes, app.json, and then you just add ext-charts, and Sencha command will automatically make sure that's demanded in for you. So one of the things I like to tell folks with ext5 is look at the guides, okay? Whomever is working on the guides today is freaking awesome. This is the best documentation for the framework to date. And there's all types of information on how do you think about the MVC plus VM model. Sorry, it's going to take a while to get that smooth in my head. All the way through migrating your ext4 applications, and it's very, very, very well written. Also take a look at the Ready for ext5 blog post from Sencha. Arthur took a lot of time in writing this blog post, and it actually helps you understand when you're looking at the old way of doing things, how do you think about the new way? And so when you actually start to write code for ext5, you already have that stuff preceded in your head. So lastly, Sencha is working on making sure that not only with the documentation that you actually have example reference applications that actually do quite a bit of work to learn from. And the ticket app was one of those things that they spend a lot of time on and they're constantly iterating on. And it's interesting because it's like a ping pong effect. They will make a feature for the framework, modify or refactor the ticket app, realize that they could totally take some new stuff and put it back in the framework. So they keep going back and forth, making sure that the reference applications are really, really tight. And they're doing a really good job of it. So, any questions at this point? Yeah?
One of your early slides is something about dependency injection. Let's talk about that.
Yes.
One reason they use depth was to get dependency injection from the user. Is there something you need to buy to that?
I'm not familiar with how depth does it, so I'll talk to you about how Sencha Command 5 does it today. So Sencha Command, I used to use only Sencha Command for generating a starter app and going to builds. That's all I used it for. And I spent some time with Don Griffin and Kevin Crow. Anyway, sorry, I heard something else. And got to really understand what Sencha Command is really doing underneath the hood, and it's actually pretty awesome. So what Sencha Command does is it literally builds an abstract, an AST tree. I always forget what that stands for. It looks at your code from a usage perspective, literally goes line by line. And unlike the older way with ext4 where you're saying, okay, my class requires this and uses this, it takes that stuff and it says, okay, that's kind of cool. Where it's really powerful is that if you're using Sencha Command 5, you don't have to worry about that. What you do is you set up, like with Compass, you use Compass Watch, you execute Sencha App Watch, and it constantly pulls the file system, looks for changes, and if there's a change, it automatically builds this bootstrap.json file and automatically positions files in the right order. So what that means is you don't have to worry about the requires stuff anymore, or uses. It just works. So if you define a class through the new keyword, ext create, using static references, using requires if you want to do that, extending. There's literally like 8 or 12 use cases where the code can figure out, holy shit, this is a dependency of this class. It actually is smart enough to know, and I'll show you in a second, where if you have a grid panel, it actually might require the doc layout. But the grid panel itself doesn't require the doc layout. That's where this shit gets really interesting. The doc layout is actually required by panel. Grid panel ultimately extends from panel. So that's why using Sencha App Watch gets to be really cool. The only thing is, if you forget to start it and you start making file system changes, you're like, why isn't my app working? I've done that in the past. It's 6 in the morning. I've had to deliver a feature or something. I think it's pretty awesome. So let me walk you through a demo real quick of something that we're working on. So this tool we haven't named yet, but it is a dependency viewer. It is a hybrid of Ext JS, D3 JS, and uses Google Pretty Print. So the idea is that you have files in your application, and eventually we'll make this cleaner to read. But something like the progress bar. So the progress bar itself has 8 dependencies. It requires on boot.js, ext.js. Hold on, let me make this a little bigger. Collapse this bad boy. It requires template and so on. But you said to yourself, how does it really require all this stuff? And you can actually ask the application to show dependencies, and he'll walk you through and show you that this is where the boot.js file is required. Is because ext is defined here. So you could say, okay, well, let's see what else maybe defined and required. Sorry, I chose a really bad example.
You got to PR this into App Inspector, Jay.
See what?
You got to PR this into the App Inspector.
Let's try something smaller. Hold on. Form panel, that's a pretty good one. There's a bug with my implementation of D3. So I'll right-click, show dependencies, and so this requires task runner. And Sencha command was smart enough to know that task runner was a string here. So using Sencha app watch is pretty freaking awesome. So in developing this application, I didn't have to set up any requires or use statements. I just set X type of something, and some other class had to find it, done. I didn't have to put a query in it. So this is something that I'm hoping will land itself in Sencha command itself as a tool. So you could, in theory, say, I want to scan this one directory, which is my application directory, and figure out what features of the framework you're using and why. So more to come on this. Any other questions? Yeah.
This is just a sign up. Are you familiar with the Stan? It's an analysis tool for Java.
No.
Because they did pretty much the same, but they got it will show you cycles. Because if well, let's say if you work in an old enterprise environment, you'll have some cycles that depends on that, depends on that within packages, and it gets really ugly really quickly.
Oh yeah.
So that's a really big help when you're working with Java.
Well, the idea is to use that tool. Let me see if I can pull this up in Snagger real quick.
I mean, how about your tool? Will it identify cycles?
I don't believe so, no. It just looks at the requirements. I'm trying to pull up, I don't have it. I had a version of this that showed the entire framework dependency model. And it just looked like a black hole in the middle. Just things are just required this, and it just got to be very unusable, which is why I wrote things
was in the middle?
No, the 2 or 4 highest required files are like the boot.js file. So if I sort this by dependency requirements, actually, where's the boot? That's interesting. Oh, because this is the inverse of shit. Most things require a component in UI. Right. Sorry, it's the other way around. Like boot really doesn't require shit. That's what it is.
Right. Everything is.
Yeah. So it's the inverse. Like thinking of this data really has been bent in my mind. Like config, ext was one of them, and there were just quite a few. It's just like you just see like just trunks, just wires just being drawn. It was ridiculous. I was hoping to get that view reinstantiated, but I didn't. So
if you want to get some more ideas on features, you might want to look at Stan.
Okay, I will. That's a good idea. Thank you. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
Any major changes to the layout system?
I don't think so. I think they got lighter because of the non-use of IE 697.
So then part of that, we were able to drop a lot of like tables or functions or tables with more field.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think there are been a lot of DOM changes, and I know that Mitch and I were just discussing this stuff earlier. Can you?
Yeah, there are like form fields don't use the table anymore. The button has just been refactored since beta, the public beta, and it's using the fluid CSS layouts now. The grid got like 20% faster because each row is now a table, and it's actually faster than using one
That's
table.
kind of like going back to EST3, though, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, they made a lot of divs in 4, didn't they?
Yes. Well, there was a table, a master table with the inner divs, but it is actually faster with each row being a table.
So that's interesting because I think from EST3 to 4, you guys were saying that the grid got a lot faster by turning it into one table. Now we're back into
It did for that version of the framework.
Yes.
Oh, this is not 6.
Let me see how they did it.
any effects on doing that table change with respect to like number of columns? I think a lot of times people are focused on the number of rows, but what we have found that number of columns also has a big effect on form, especially when you start doing mocking.
Yeah, they went back to the EXT2 way of doing it.
Yeah, I'm not too sure about it. I don't think it's really changed as far as how many columns and how that affects performance. But I know I think it started 4.2.2, hidden columns aren't rendered anymore.
Okay.
Before it was just hidden, but they were still there in the DOM.
Yes.
Are there other ways to touch API to get closer to the ViewController JS API and vice versa?
No, not to my knowledge. Trust me, this is like magical merger that we're all like into towards. We're hoping for, and I don't believe in this iteration is going to happen.
So back to the layout thing. Are we still required to do the suspend movies ourselves?
Yes. The framework can't really guess too much. You know, if you remove a component, it can't really guess if you're going to then add more.
Actually, I forgot.
Well, good.
Yeah, thanks, Al. Other questions? Well, thank you very much, guys. It was a pleasure.
You guys want to take a couple minutes to grab a beer, use the restroom or something like that? Now's the time as Mitch sets up.
Well, that sounds really bad. Plug in my laptop.
Yeah, what? I'm going to see if I can already see you. Hang on,
I don't talk as much, Jay.
what's your meetup?
Breaking.
There we go. Thanks. Your RSVP.
All right, I'm in.
Here, hand me the pen and I'll put it in my frame.
How do you have the stores? Yeah, you have the stores block and just like classes.
Yeah.
Class is just like very.
It's just an arbitrary name.
Anyway, for whatever reason, that mic is sticking out, but I got the audio on this guy.
It's just odd to see the
Yeah, I fucked with the audio earlier.
So they allow you to use an entire object so you can have a key to look into.
You unmute him?
In on rather than having an object index. It's an array of objects that didn't have a key or something like that.
So you can use that to manage
Composite view, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you can actually set up data types and stuff like that. What happened?
You were muted the whole time.
Oh, I muted the whole thing?
Well, he got it off his webcam.
I got sound on this one.
Anything on this one?
I was trying to find the audio setting.
You didn't get my audio?
No, I did get yours. Yeah, you can just mute yourself again, because I'll just use the audio on here, it's fine.
All the switches on for the.
No,
Yeah, it's hard to manage like multiple mics, because you start getting like weird input collection.
Show us how
I just got to plug in both. We can write Ext JS, but we can't get a fan started.
There you go.
Ext JS is so simple.
Yes.
You're wrong, man. I predate you. That's the card I'll let you have. Even the creator calls it EXE. I'm saying.
The last I talked to him, didn't give a But at the point, it's YUI. So it's not an all caps. So it's not an initial.
So when you're typing X, you're typing EXE.
Yeah, but when I type save, I don't do DAB.
I'm saying, just go. That's it. Got nothing else.
I think you're good to go whenever, yeah.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Mitchell Simmons, like Art says, I work at Sencha. This is my contact info. Shameless plug for middle, if you could use it all. All of it. So what I'm going to talk about is one of the new features in XJS 5, one that Jay didn't talk about. Probably knew I was going to talk about it. And something that I'm a little biased because I'm proud of it because I wrote it. And it's a router class. So those of you that work with Sencha Touch 2, the API should be extremely similar to Sencha Touch 2. So it's part of that thing that we're trying to share code. It's really more of sharing the API of it. So who handles history in their applications? XJS, Touch. Okay, so, oh my God. So what is history? It's really the history stack within the browser. So if you go to one page and you go to the next page, the browser keeps track of that. You have that back and forward button in the browser that 60% of your users are used to using. So if you're not handling it, you may have a little bit of a usability issue with your users. They may have to learn how to use your application more than just clicking that back button. Then a single page application, you hit that back button, you're really just exiting your application. It's getting thrown back onto whatever page they were at before. So it could be very frustrating for users. And on XJS 4, you could do it. It's just more of a manual process. You have to listen to the change event on x.util.history. It's not MVC. You have to do it. Maybe have a controller where you start it up, or you do that x.util.history.on, and you listen to that change, and you handle all the logic within that. Whenever the hash token changes, you have to do all the logic yourself. It really leads to kind of convoluted code. It really gets ugly. It's kind of hard to maintain. Say, developer A creates it. He has intimate knowledge of how it works. But, maybe hire somebody in. Now that person has to learn what developer A did. And that's where it gets to be really hard to maintain. But XJS 5, we have this router concept. It still uses x.util.history under the hood. It just makes it easier to listen to the changes of the hash. It comes with features that you may be used to, like 4 actions, where you kind of have security. Of course, don't rely on the client for security, but you can prevent the route from continuing to execute. And you can have parameters within that hash. Maybe you want to have a token that's like a user, then you have like a user ID. But user ID, 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatnot, is a parameter of that hash. And within the router, it becomes an argument in a function that is executed. Of course, it's all MVC, so it makes it incredibly easy to configure. So all 95% of you that don't use it is really simple for you. And of course, since it's in MVC, it's easy to. It's now a standard within XJS. It's easier to maintain. Developers who are familiar with the framework should be able to just pick it up. So they're called, word definitions. A hash. In a URI, it's after the hash, the number sign, whatever you call it. And right up here, it's the pound users. The pound users, the whole thing is a hash. And then within that hash, you have tokens. So like, in this one, I have 2 tokens, and we'll get to the multiple routes that you can handle in one hash. But users is a token. Messages is a token. But I wanted to define these so I don't And later on, I'm probably just going to say if I don't even know. So some of the new classes. I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive than a high level, and we're going to get medium level maybe. So you got the router. That kind of manages everything. It's what listens to the change event on history. And then you got the route, where that's really where a lot of the logic is. When the hash fires, the router is then going to go through all the routes that it has, that it's managing. It's going to ask each one, hey, I have this token. Do you match it? If so, it's going to kind of queue that up. And that's where the queue comes in. It's kind of just a mixed collection. Pretty much what it is. So a big array that we can manage it. And the reason why it's all split out is it's a lot of, so what the framework does is what the framework does. But a lot of your applications have certain needs. So if we split things out into more classes, you are then allowed to globally override to suit whatever your applications need. That's why it's kind of broken out into 3 instead of probably done in just the router. For an example, we're going to use the hash users. What we're going to do is we're going to have a routes object. This is the token there, so that matches the users. So when that changes, that's what's going to tell the route, or that's what's going to tell the route. Yes, I do recognize this. Include me in the execution. Then we just have a string as the function, as the method on the control. With parameters, like I talked about, the user, 123. That 123 is an ID of that user that we want to view or whatnot. And it's, it's really easy. I don't know if a lot of you use like server-side routers. It's going to be pretty familiar. Where you're going to use the :ID. So that :ID is what's going to tell the route I have a parameter within that hash. So when that hash updates and that changes, remember whatever that value is. And that's going to get passed into as an argument. If you have multiple parameters in one hash, it's going to be individual arguments, and it's going to be in the same order as you define it up here. One way to control what values that parameter can be is we have conditions. This comes directly over from Sencha Touch, so the API is completely the same here. Conditions is always going to be an object. You're going to have the key as the parameter, so :ID. The colon also, it's not just ID. And then it's going to be a regular expression string. And the reason why it's not an actual regular expression, it's a string, is how it works, how it tells if it matches whatever token is updated, is it builds a master regular expression. So if you have multiple parameters, it has to kind of piece those together. And then it makes one single regular expression. So the default, some of you probably can't see it, it's pretty much digits, spaces, what it can be. A way to kind of control the way the route executes is you have a before action. And that'll hook in before, so you have the user, it hooks in before this. Let me back up for a second. So the router is going to go through all of the routes. And it's going to ask each one, do you match this, do you match this? Then it's going to queue them all together. Once it goes through all the routes that it has, it's going to go start executing each of them. JavaScript is a synchronous language, so you always know that the order of the routes that were created is going to be executed in that order. So you can always have maybe like one of them that is like a master one where you have a before action. And you can do things in there like you can do an AJAX request and continue the execution of the route after that AJAX returns, or maybe you have to wait until some event that fires. Also notice there's an action argument. And that's pretty much what I was saying. So the thing about the action is that's what makes it into an asynchronous. So you can wait on that AJAX to to be finished and come back. You have to execute that action.resume to resume that queue. So it's going to execute that action, then it's going to start executing the other routes. But you have to execute the action.resume, or else you could have memory leaks. So a little more about
So when the page loads, if these things are in the URL, that's what makes these actions fire off?
Yeah, that hash.
And then that thing you were showing that was like the regular expression, it could have been like, if the ID is 0 to 9, do this. If the ID is 10 to 100, do this action. If the ID is this, do that action.
Yeah, so that you would actually, that's a use case I never thought of.
But what would it be? It's like, so you think of it as like only do it if the ID is like 0 to 9?
Right. Yeah, so if you pass in user/A, this is not going to match. It's only going to match if it's 0 to 9.
Okay.
That's a good use case. I'm going to create a story for that.
You wrote this?
Yes.
It seems like that's the use case. That's interesting. It's just like you put it in there and who uses that. It's neat. We need like a sociologist.
So a little more about that action.resume method. You must execute it once again, and you know it's very important. It really is, or else you can get memory leaks. It allows that asynchronous operation because it won't continue until you execute it. You can also, so you have that queue of them, so maybe you have 5 queued up. So that first one may be like a master security one. Maybe you want to check if the current user is allowed to see whatever it's trying to see. And if it's not, you want to stop it. You don't want to allow anything else. That's where that action.resume, you control that execution. If you don't pass anything, so undefined, it's just going to continue on. Everything's fine. If you pass in false, it's going to stop that current route, but it's going to continue to execute the others. Yes. Okay. And if you pass true, it's going to stop all of the queued routes. It's going to dump them. We're going to stop here. This little example here. Here's just an example with that AJAX request. And it's something that a lot of users are probably going to want. So it just works. So maybe sometimes where maybe somebody typed in something wrong or whatnot, so you have an unmatched route. What's going to happen is the router is going to fire the unmatched route event on the application level. I don't really like telling people to listen to events on the application. It should be in the, the application is more of a bootstrap, and the controllers are where the logic should be. But with XJS4, some of you they have used like the event domains. There's a controller one. Well, the application is technically just a controller. It extends controller. So it's a controller. It gets all this, all the functionality of a controller. And so I would say listen to it in a controller. Here is an example. I'm using a wildcard. The application doesn't really have an ID. It just uses wildcard. And it's going to execute the unmatched, and it's going to pass the token that was unmatched. Now, if that token has a parameter, and, so maybe they did users 123 instead of user 123. Well, since we don't have a route configured, we don't know 123 is a parameter, so you shouldn't expect it to know that there's a parameter. It's just going to pass the string of that token in there.
So, so if there's multiple tokens, like you have like user, then type ID or whatever it is, does that return all of the tokens as like a single string or an array or?
No, it's configured to execute individually. And that's,
okay.
I'll get to it in a second, but they're pretty much sandbox for each other. Just next.
Oh. Sorry.
Get ahead. So, XJS apps can be really complex. And I didn't think of it at first, but Don, he wrote, back before Sencha, he had to write something in XJS3, and he needed multiple hash tokens in one hash. I don't know what his application was, but it must have been hella complex. And so I surprised him, and I actually just built it in there. So what it is that user 123, that's one token like I was talking about. Then you got the messages 5HS, and that's another token. And it's gonna pretty much, it's a string, so it's pretty much gonna split it on that pipe. And then it's gonna start with the first one. And it's gonna go through and ask, you know, which routes match it. And it's gonna go through and execute that queue. Then it's gonna go to the second one. And it's gonna run through, find out which routes match it, and execute that queue. So they're totally separated. The first one's going to run through the whole process, then the second one's going to run through the whole process. Yes?
So if you have like a view or a grid that you want like multiple details, maybe like user and customer or something like that, you would need to make like a composite token to get both those values together. You just listen, and then when you get both fired of action.
But I would have a longer route for that. Instead of two of them, have just one, so you get both those parameters in that function. Okay. So like I said, you know, each of them are sandbox. So if you stop the users one, the messages will still continue to fire. Totally sandbox from each other. And they're always going to execute in the order they are in the total hash. The user is always going to execute before the message. And here's kind of a workflow. So it's going to go through the user, it's going to find the matched routes, it's going to execute them all. And once that's all done, or maybe you stopped it or whatnot, then it's going to go through the message. It's going to run through its process.
You know how like a grid render, when you get the value and then you get the record? What if like in this you get your hash, but you also get access to like all the other hashes and the values?
You can still do that. I mean, JavaScript has access to it.
Yourself.
It's a manual process on that one. So
Okay,
you
nice
do
answer.
what location dot hash or something.
Yeah, I guess they're all the hashes are always available everywhere.
Right. So yeah, if you have one of them, one hash, but you need that one from the second one, it is going to be a manual process, but you can just grab it from it. And for that, the multiple ones, you know, one controller, it's the same. You just have to think of each of them separate. Instead of one entity, you have to think of two of them. And I have an example here where I'm going to stop. So in the on before user, which is in the user hash or route, you know, I'm stopping all of those users. But the on message will still continue to fire. I kind of drill in some of these things because I want to make sure everybody understands the whole workflow of it. You know, so if you stop all of them, you're not stopping the whole hash. It's just that one token, that one that has all those routes. And so more questions.
So how would you set up if you wanted like multiple parameters? Would it be like user /123/456?
Yeah.
And it would just
So like the hash or the route?
Like you want one route with multiple parameters.
You would have to like make your own thing, like a parameter / you know, like 4 digits for this and then 6 digits for that. Is that right?
So if you have like, so maybe admin is one parameter and 123 is one parameter?
Yeah.
You have those two there? Yeah, so you just, in the route, you just do user /:type /:ID.
Oh,
so then you're going to have a type and you're going to have an ID parameter then. And that's, there are going to be separate arguments in that action.
Oh.
So like the function would be kind of like that. I've never coded it.
So like what I was asking before, if you want, if you want like more, if you want like 3 values, you just give them one name, and then you put the values associated with that name. As opposed to like if I want to list it and get like a user and a customer, I don't put like hash user equals this, and you know pipe hash customer equals this. It would just be like whatever the name is, and then you know the user ID / the customer ID or something.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Am I misunderstanding something where when you have this resume function, if you pass it true, so not resume?
That's the stop all. So it's kind of like a stop all, I guess you can kind of call it. So true stops all of them, false stops just the current one, and undefined doesn't stop it.
I think you say that happens to be true. You got to kind of tolerate to it.
Yeah, there's like a parameter name. The true doesn't apply to the function.
Right. That's true.
Well, there's three types of methods. So you know, if you're thinking true should resume it.
Well, yeah, not necessarily thinking that, but it's like, yeah, it's like there's a parameter. That parameter has a name, which is like stop or whatever, but the function is resume. But obviously that true doesn't apply to the name of the function. But it's just.
Well, this is something from Sencha Touch. Is it doesn't have this concept of a queue. So action.resume will continue everything. So to add on, so to be API compliant with that, I had to keep that in mind. So then true and false, you know, which one stops one, which one stops all. So I can see what your point is. I just had to stay within Sencha Touch.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's documented.
That's the key.
Anything else? No? Pizza good? Woo! Beer's good? Sure.
Thanks, Sencha, and thank you for shooting.
I just want to say thanks for Art for putting together everything. Thanks to CNX for hosting us and the pizza. And I guess thanks to me for some of the beer.
So then real quick before we all head out of here, let me oops, open the right thing on my screen. So those of you who are familiar with the Chicago meetup here, you are very sick of seeing this application I've written. It does actually work, so that it does the job. It does the job, but long story short, this is a Sencha Touch app written with MVC, not MVM. Maybe I should refactor this next time. It just connects to our meetup page, so for tonight's meeting, the XJS 5 overview gives me a list of everyone who RSVP'd. So as I said, if you wanted to be in the running for the prizes we have to give away tonight, you had to actually have RSVP'd.
This is an RSVP order, huh?
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, usually I'm the first one to RSVP. So, needless to say, you need to be present to win, and you cannot work for either Modus or Sencha in order to win. So, sorry, Jay. Prizes we have tonight, we have 3 Sencha t-shirts. They are all size large, I think. So hopefully that fits you, otherwise you can give it away to somebody. And the other prize is from JetBrains. It's a license of your choice to any of their products, which is not considered teamwear. That only excludes like 2 of their products, but still worth up to, like I said, I think it's either $600 or $700 in a license for one of their products. So, see here, Richard Malone.
Oh,
you are a winner tonight. All right, Richard, 4 goes here. Ron Bailey, I don't think you're here tonight. Ron, if you're online, sucks to you. Breaking Voices, actually. License or t-shirt. And grab me afterwards. I'll get hooked up here. So. We now have 3 Sencha t-shirts left. Christine Brown. There you go.
This is for all these months.
Yes. Finally pays off. Arthur cannot win. Too bad.
You don't have any conditions in there?
Dion, are you here tonight? No? Alright. And Eric Weiler?
Yes.
I
want a t-shirt.
It's me.
When you let it go, I haven't seen you.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I didn't realize you guys were watching. Sorry. Scorpius 86. Anybody wants to claim to be Scorpius 86? Too late. All right. Matt. Matt, I think that's amazing. Matt, no. Matt's not here. Ryan. Ryan here? All right, Ryan wants t-shirts.
Man loves
Again, thank you all for coming. Please drink more beer, eat more pizza, and ask questions. Next month, we have Michael Palovich talking about Salesforce and Sencha Touch, so don't miss it. Thank you guys.
See you in a coffee for a while.
I didn't notice that. This is just marketing crap in the way. So.
It doesn't say 5 or
Well, good. Right?
It's good for now. Good for the
Our current approach